Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're rounding out the sort of package that will combine into our unified mind set, and we'll be looking at these two theme decks, the Espeon and Deoxys theme deck, and the Umbreon and Darkrai theme deck. A handful of new cards in here, so definitely worth mentioning because they will be impactful for how our unified minds decks shape up, and they'll definitely be incorporated into some of the newer lists. So we'll hop down to the trainer cards. Only three to talk about. One of them is an item called Cherish Ball, and this is probably the best ball search we have in the game. You get to search your deck for a GX, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Very simple, but very, very effective, really. Obviously, it's great for like tag teams and all that sort of stuff. Getting you into your basics is obviously a huge deal, but also very good to help you find a evolution GX as well. So maybe you can play like an Elms engine for your basics, and then if you're going GX evolutions, you can have Cherish Balls for them as well. Also, bear in mind that it goes to hand rather than like, for so long we've sort of been known to the gold standard of like nest balling for stuff, but now you can Cherish Ball and have good accessibility to Dedenne GX on turn 1, so that's actually really important because this acts as now like pseudo draw when we need it to be as well. So Cherish Ball, very, very strong, will be seen in a lot of decks. I foresee it being fairly difficult for many evolution decks to work based on the lack of ball search we have. That's only tentative right now. Obviously, things can change. But as of right now, I'm thinking that it's good to be a basic in the game, and Cherish Ball is pointing towards the direction of basic GXs. I think they're just easy to search out, easy to get going, and that's going to be nice and consistent. So I think Cherish Ball, very, very strong card. And obviously getting like stage 1 GX is out. Like if you're looking at, again at like that Beast Box style deck where you can have early search for like stack attackers and like some basics, but then on like turn 2 and 3 it can end up being live for your naggers. That sounds excellent. So Cherish Ball, very, very strong card. We get one new supporter card. It's called Hapu. She allows you to look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put 2 of them into your hand and discard the rest of the cards. So it's very similar to Sage's Training from the Heart Gold Soul Silver era. It's one more card that you're both getting to look at if you're trying to pick out some key pieces, but also it's an additional discard, so it's more powerful, but also more of a drawback. I say drawback in air quotes because this can be a live activator for discarding synergies. We do lose Ultra Ball. That's one of our key like discarding synergy type cards that we've had for a long time. So Hapu trying to fill that void, maybe for some Malamar. Obviously, that's an archetype that feels like might flourish because it's going to have Mysterious Treasure, and not many archetypes can boast that sort of consistency. So Hapu being a supporter for potentially the likes of those decks, a few other like Naganadel-based decks, like the non-GX for charging ups, Hapu might be influential. I can very much see this card going down the route of Sages, where it's never really going to be a 4 of, but maybe like a 2 of index for that extra digging deep into your list, and also having some extra discard synergy. I think she's good for that. One like slight concern is that we don't have very easy like Pokemon recovery. It's exclusively Lure Ball and Rock's Grit, I think, for Pokemon recovery. So there is a slight concern that Hapu might be dumping too much stuff. So she may be specific to only a handful of archetypes that can abuse her, but she'll end up being strong in those specific archetypes that want to get a bunch of stuff in the discard to get things rolling. Something reminds me of like the Chandelure Stage 2 deck that I'm going to try and make work, fingers crossed. Being a non-GX Stage 2 is like the hardest thing to search out in the entire game. But the Chandelure cheats. As soon as you get one out, it can cheat other stuff out. So I'm hoping that Hapu can get us some way towards that, which is going to be awesome. There's the Night City Stadium that says all basic dark Pokemon in play. Yours and your opponents have no retreat cost, so this is kind of like a reprint to all sorts of other stadiums. It's like the Fairy Garden, but for dark energies now. So we're getting sort of like a spiritual successor to Fairy Garden and Aromatisse from this little theme deck. We now get Night City, the stadium, and we also are getting a Weavile GX, which is essentially the same as Aromatisse, but for only basic energies. I think they kind of learn from Aromatisse. They end up becoming like this Rainbow Energy boxy style deck, and that's always very dangerous when you have tag teams that are so good at taking hits, and then you can like move the energy off onto the next big threat and stuff like that. So I like Night City. I think it's, you know, one piece of this sort of dark box puzzle that we're looking for. and Weavile provides that other section for us. So I think this is a fantastic stadium, very, very strong, competes with only a couple other dark stadiums, like Devoured Field, if your numbers need to be like tweaked or whatever. Devoured Field might even be rotating, I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it just seems like a very strong include in dark stuff. I can foresee the dark deck mainly going around a combination of the new Dark Ray Umbreon that we'll talk about in a moment, but also the Zoro Ninja. I think that card ends up getting a big kind of buff because the majority of archetypes will be slower just by their consistency being a lot lower. Obviously, the fire stuff will still be good, and they'll still welder cheat and get a whole bunch of energies like on board straight away. But I like this sort of like Weavile Night City type thing where you try and flood the board of energies for your dark stuff. That's kind of one thing that I think might be reasonable from the next set, and we'll talk about that Umbreon in a moment. But we'll start off with the Psychic stuff with the Espeon and Deoxys, a 260 hit point Psychic type with Psychic weakness that comes with 2 attacks. Psycho Circle does 10 base and 30 more times the number of Psychic Pokemon on your bench. So it's kind of like a Mind Jack, but you're in control of it fully. So the full bench will be 150, and then you have that 10 base. So 160 is the baseline for Psycho Circle. Obviously good enough to deal with non-GXs in one hit, even like stage 1 and 2s pretty easily. And it's going to be 2-shotting most tag teams, so that's really good. Obviously, you're a Psychic type hitting for Psychic weakness yourself, but also receiving Psychic weakness back, which is worrying for things like the Giratina that's already around. But we'll look at the Jirachi in a moment. That'll make you a little bit more comfortable about using this guy, just because otherwise a Giratina would like feast on this tag team, which is straight up real concern. Obviously, I already mentioned Malamar earlier when talking about Hapu, and I think the Psychic stuff looks really promising because Energy Acceleration is always good, and it's highlighted as even better in a format where DCE isn't around. Obviously, DCE is here, but it's unlikely that we're getting the reprint. This, again, has that little A in the theme deck itself, so I'm pretty certain that DCE is not going to be in our new set. If that's the case, yeah, like Energy Acceleration, its value goes up because less people can essentially have the same thing by cheating with DCEs, right? So having Energy Acceleration gets more powerful, and Malamar has some of the best search in the game. So I think Malamar stuff is always worth looking at. Psycho Circle does a reasonable number, and the archetype wants to fill its board anyway, full of Malamars and a few other Psychic type attackers. So I think it seems pretty reasonable overall. Obviously, because this is enough to knock out Dedenne as well, which is like a pretty critical number, I would say, for taking cheap prizes, which is nice. Then we have the Cross Divide GX for, again, that Psychic, colorless cost. You put 10 counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. So this is literally the Divide GX attack of the Stage 1 Espeon GX back from Sun and Moon. But if this has an additional 3 energy attached, you do 20 counters instead. So you're doubling the value for double the price, basically. 20 individual counters is very flexible and very powerful. You really shouldn't underestimate that you will be able to make the most out of every damage counter in almost every situation. So although it's not like immediately getting you a one-shot, it's like finishing something off perfectly and setting something up probably perfectly, or setting up a few like lower hit point things. Like this is knocking out like 3 Jirachi, like it's almost killing 3 Jirachis, right? If you have Distortion Door at your side, it can do all these sorts of things. So it's similar to like a Ultra Necrozma's Sky Scorch. I think that's the, like, it feels fairly weak compared to Ultra Necrozma just because of how efficient that attack is. So I don't know, Espeon and Deoxys may just be part of this sort of Psychic toolbox, but at the moment it seems less impressive than Mew and Mewtwo. So I think it's got some drawbacks to it, but that 20 damage is very, very flexible, and I wouldn't write it off straight out, straight away. Especially because we have this Rocchi Gx. It's a 160 hit point Psychic type, which isn't great, you know. It's low hit points. It's a Dedenne, basically. And it has the ability Psychic Zone. If a Pokemon with Psychic Weakness receives damage from an attack, don't apply Weakness. So obviously this is huge for Mewtwo and Mew tag team, and Espeon and Deoxys if you're going to try and play those. The biggest concern is that the ability can get shut down by Power Plant, which is a bit of a worry. So there may be those like crazy moments where you feel like you're completely safe, and then it's just like, lol, Power Plant dead, which is definitely a risk having an ability on a GX like this, especially with such low hit points as well. It can just get grinched quite often, so that's always a concern. It does come with a couple of attacks itself. Star Search for a Psychic allows you to get an energy and attach it to one of your Psychic Pokemon. It's fine. Like, it's that sort of situation where you just happen to have the awkward starter of Jirachi and you go second and you're just like, I guess I'll just Star Search and, you know, try and thin the deck. And it's like you are able to pay retreat, but also you were able to manually attach to your main attacker, which is like fine, I guess. And then we have the Star Shield GX attack. For 3 Psychics, you do 100. Prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to this Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. So it's basically a Swift Run, but for 3 Psychics instead. We've seen that on a lot of different Pokemon actually recently, and there's another one that has that same similar effect. I can't remember. It's from one of the latest sets that I've talked about. But yeah, that's reasonable, especially with Guzma gone. It's more difficult to get around this, so you can buy yourself a turn sometimes. Like, you can treat it as like a free 100 damage, which is pretty cool if it comes off. We have a non-GX Cresselia. It has 130 hit points. Again, Psychic type. We always have to take these seriously because you can actually search out Psychics pretty easily. And you do 60 and heal 30. That's really bad. 130 and discard a Psychic from this Pokemon for that very high cost. So this is outclassed by other Psychic basics. The Salazzle is one of the most boring Salazzles we've seen. It has vanilla attacks, which isn't going to do much. We have a new free retreat Cosmog, but it only has 40 hit points, which is a little ugly. We have Umbreon and Darkrai Tag Team GX, 270 hit points, basic, weak to fighting, a nice resistance to Psychic, which is becoming more and more important, I would say. Again, I keep sort of stressing the potential power of Malamar, and having a free resistance is always going to be great for you to make you more tanky against them. Obviously, weakness to fighting is a little ugly. Fortunately, like, Marshchamp sort of stays out of range with a revenge style attack, so you're also obviously out of range of Sledgehammer and stuff like that. So your tank ability kind of gets around. Well, it doesn't really like get around the weakness. It's just you have to be a dedicated fighting deck to actually take advantage of this to the fullest extent. But it has the Black Lance attack for Dark Colorless. It does 150 and 60 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon GX or EX. So it is literally souped up Night Spear to the points where we're now doing 60 more to the active and 30 more to the bench. Only if it's an EX or GX. And I think this is going to be pretty good. I think we'll look at the Weavile in a moment. And I think this is probably going to go alongside the Greninja Zoro. I think they'll work in combination with one another. This is potentially like an easy early game option. And you're trying to use this while you don't have many energies in play. And then the Greninja Zoro will eventually get to that point of one-shotting. So in those early stages, you can go for a Black Lance, set up a couple things for knockouts, and you can see where we're going with this. Then we just free retreat out of this one, move energy with the Weavile, which I'll talk about in a moment, onto your new Greninja Zoro, and suddenly you have a new threat built with energy committed elsewhere along the board. So we're hoping that the Greninja Zoro can then sort of take the reins to start getting one-shots after, like, even one Black Lance sometimes can set up a couple tag teams nicely for the rest of the game. So that's a really, really nice attack. Very, very strong indeed. There's also the Dead Moon GX attack. This is kind of why I think this card might be like the lead in the deck, because it says your opponent can't play any trainer cards from their hand during their next turn. So the biggest problem right now with Greninja Zoroark Tag Team is that everything else is faster than you, and you sort of start on the back foot a lot of the time. So being able to just go for like an attachment here or there, whilst also getting some energy in the bin and getting some like Poipoles down or something like that, or even getting like Darkrai GX in the bin, maybe with Hapu that becomes a lot more reasonable down here, with like a basic build. We can sort of start setting ourselves up for damage and getting Dark Energies around our board. We even want to get Sneasels down, obviously, in the new sort of era of this deck, the way I'm picturing it at least. And you want to just go for a Dead Moon GX, because currently the Greninja Zoro's GX attack I still think is way too slow. So you just Dead Moon, hopefully you hurt their combo potential, hurt them being able to get set up early. And then you go, okay, next turn I can find a combination to use some of these Dark Energies from, you know, like Darkrai Prism Star, Darkrai GX, a few other cards like that. And then suddenly you can go Black Lance, tank a hit, retreat into your Greninja and Zoroark tag team and start using the Dark Pulse like over and over again. That's pretty much how I try and like envision the deck going, how it plays out its first few turns in like optimal situations. And it doesn't sound like you're asking for much, to be honest. Using a Dead Moon GX attack slows people down, hopefully enough to keep your guy safe. And then you can move into that Black Lance, and at that point hopefully you'll have like 5, 6 energies in play to mess around with if your engine's gone smoothly. So yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. So Darkrai and Umbreon, I think, is a really sweet card. We then have a Alolan Grimer. Obviously, the Sun and Moon Alolan Muck is going, but this would have been the best one. It can collect for 2 free cards and also has 2 retreat costs. So as soon as we lose the best Muck, we get the best Grimer, which is a bit sad. But this is definitely the best Grimer in like expanded. We have a new Murkrow and Honchkrow. Honchkrow does 30 to one of your opponent's bench. Sorry, to any of your opponent's Pokemon. That's really bad. And the Dark Cutter to 60 for 1. That's also very bad. We have a new Sneasel, 70 hit points, which is a little bit frustrating, I think. Do we still keep the 60 hit point one? I think we do. It's Celestial Storm. So if we need to play an Elm build, we can go for that. This seems worse than the Sneaky Smash one. We have the Weavile GX, 200 hit point stage 1. I've already mentioned it a couple times. And it has the ability Shadow Connection. As often as you like during a turn, you may move a basic dark energy from one of your Pokemon in play to another of your Pokemon in play. So remember, it's basic. That's the only like stipulation that makes it very different from Aromatisse. Aromatisse was able to do like rainbows and all that other stuff and prisms, which was what made it such a like toolboxy type build. Here, I think the Weavile will be to supplement that Darkrai Umbreon, as well as the other tag team, the Greninja Zoroark. I think that's the main home I see this card working, but I think it's very, very good for that, because we have all these cards. Even if it was like Naganadel, previously you would have to play like an E-switch and stuff like that, and find multiple of them throughout the game. Now the Weavile sort of sits on board and is doing that for you freely, and is very, very strong for that purpose. It does come with a couple of attacks as well. Claw Slash does 130 for 2 dark and a colorless. Which is fine. It knocks out non-GXs, which is fine. And also comes with a Night Order GX attack. Search your deck for any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. Now, you may laugh at that and say, like, wow, that's really slow and terrible. But it could be, like, a get-out-of-jail option if you don't have much else going on. And you shouldn't really underestimate the lack of ball search we genuinely are suffering from in this format. Obviously, Cherish Ball will help out the Darkrai, Umbreon, and the Greninja Zoroark to a big extent. But the Night Order could get you like more set up if you really needed it to do. Like I say, kind of like a get out of jail free option if you really need to. It's all about the ability for this card, but the rest of it is like vanilla and like okay in a pinch. So yeah, that's the mini sets. I think the Cherish Ball is easily like the biggest card. Like this is the one I want to talk about the most. It's really just making GX's way better, and it gives us some hint of ball search, thank goodness, in the game. So it gives many decks direction. There's things like Friend Ball, Cherish Ball, Com, Treasure, Electromagnetic Radar, and then there's like Lure Ball if you want to combine it with Hapu. So yeah, there's not much going for us right now. Maybe a couple others that I forgot, but those are the main ones that sort of stick in my mind. Oh, Netball's one. So yeah, the Pokemon Ball Search is scarce, I would say. So you really have to choose your deck wisely immediately, like for Worlds. Like one of the first things I would say is like, the thing you need to make happen in any deck is just do what you think you want to be doing. Like the powerful stuff you can do, make that happen as often as possible. And usually that comes from being able to find your Pokemon in the first place and then get energies and stuff onto them and do all the rest. But it always starts with that step one. Find the Pokemon that you want. And there'll only be a handful of decks that will be very good at doing that. So that would be my initial like word of warning if you're looking at stuff for Worlds. Obviously, I'm going to move on to a big rotation video pretty soon. I'm going to try and make it, at least towards the end of the week, ready to go. So I'm going to put a lot of time into it. And I'll have a better picture at what archetypes I can sort of see still alive, what's surviving, what's just completely gone, even if the cards aren't rotating themselves, like what support that they lose, which makes them unviable anymore. So yeah, plenty to discuss. I think the Hapu is also a really nice supporter card, and the dark stuff impresses me more than the psychic stuff that we get here. But the Jirachi seems like it might be pretty important for the Mew and Mewtwo. So yeah, hope you did enjoy, guys. That's the last kind of piece of the puzzle for Unified Minds. So my initial thoughts are all on the channel now. Obviously, they were just brief, and there may have been a mistake here or two, here or there, on a couple cards and stuff. Obviously, you can read it over yourselves, and I'll start working towards set review and stuff closer to the time when we actually get our full set list announced and stuff. because there's going to be some controversy around if we get any reprints at all. People holding out for the likes of Ultra Ball, Nest Ball, DCE. Like, those are the biggest cards I would say that go just for like general decks and how they function. But essentially, from what I've seen, I think like that's what we're going to have. I think from initial speculation, I think we're just losing everything. So that's how I want to start my mentality, at least, and see how different the game is when all this stuff changes. So hope you did enjoy this video, guys, and I hope you're starting to prepare yourself for Unified Minds and Worlds if you're not focused on the NAIC or any regionals upcoming. So it's going to be exciting to start looking at that. Obviously, that's where I'm kind of looking towards now personally, as much as I am focused on the current meta, and I'm going back to deck lists next week, well, throughout this week. I'm also like really trying to get on the ball for Worlds because I've got a lot of time that I can dedicate to it, and I want to do pretty well because I'm going to grind through day one. So yeah, that's it, guys. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you tomorrow for a new deck. Cheers.